Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to another episode of The Ways We Move, the podcast that highlights innovative mobility solutions and the people behind them. My name is Nicolas Zart, and I am your host on this podcast. And I'm smiling because today we're late. We're late delivering this on Thursday afternoons. I'm on the East Coast of the USA. And because I thought it was Wednesday, so I don't know if it's a senior moment or something else, I am rushing to get this to you in time. You will have it on Thursday. Today, I'm also bringing in another important guest, another important person in the aviation and advanced air mobility industry, and that is Sergio Cecutta, who has been around for a long, long time, as we will find out, who has a long history, a long background in aviation, and then all of a sudden started to look into what is this thing called UAM and eVTOLs, which eventually turned into advanced air mobility, or AAM. And Sergio has his company is called SMG Consulting, and he is one of the very few. In fact, I think he's one of the only ones. There's another company out there that has a rating system where you can understand what the companies are doing and their financial health and everything, which hopefully will put a link to that in this video. But if not, you can always look him up on LinkedIn. You will find it. So without further ado, let's hear from Sergio. Sergio, take it away. Hey, Sergio. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Now managing partner at SMG Consulting. Company started about 13 years ago. It's a consulting firm on the strategic and business side of the house, and it covers aerospace, defense, and the auto tech industries. As far as advanced air mobility, we have been playing in this field since the first day, so shortly after the first Uber Elevate. And we have been doing this for now close to 7 years.
Yep. Yeah. It's been that long with Uber Elevate. I can't believe it. I was
8 years.
just talking about it not too long ago. Well, it was 2017, so there you go. Yeah, 8 years ago, my friend. 8 years ago, indeed. Wow. So you're also one of those few people who have been lucky enough to have seen the industry develop. But what are you guys doing now inside of advanced air mobility?
Well, so we produce and deploy some specific tools for the entire industry. That would be our AM reality index, infrastructure index. There's order information. There is entry into service states. There is some specific research note that we published, and then we work with, I would say, practically everyone in the industry on like specific engagement, providing specific data.
Tell us a little bit about your index reality, because I think you're one of the rare people who actually have that index. And I don't think there might have been another company at one point doing something, but you're the only ones doing it, right?
Well, to the best of our knowledge, yes. The entire index was born as an internal way to sort the possible winners in the industry, and then we figured out that maybe, possibly, the industry might be interested in it. And I think 5 years later, it has demonstrated this. And in fact, when is it? In the middle of December, it will be the fifth birthday of the index. And
Right.
it's interesting because
Already.
one of the questions that I get from people is, how long are you going to keep doing this as we approach certification? And my answer was, don't worry, we're not approaching certification yet. So we still have some ways to go. But again, this is the other part. The whole industry is not going to certify next year, in 2 years, and so we think that there is a value to this. We created one on the infrastructure side because we've always said this industry, if you want to make it as a diagram, we see this as a three-legged stool. One leg would be the vehicles we talked about, the other leg would be the infrastructure, and that's why we created this. And then the last leg would be operators, and we are going to work on that shortly. But again, the sense of urgency on the operator side, it's not as high, for the simple reason that, aside from a few operators that are testing vehicles, of
Yeah.
which there is two, and they're the same aircraft, but in two parts of the world, really no one else is testing anything.
Yeah, it's hard to rate only two companies within a segment of an industry, and we know who these companies are, and well, they're hedging their bets, and that's wonderful. That's fantastic. I think to the other question that people ask you, I think there is a point to continue going forward. Actually, even after certification, it doesn't mean that once you have certification, the game is over. But and we'll get back to the certification question because I'm glad you popped that box open. It's one that needs that we regularly talk about it on this podcast. But yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of juice that you can get out of the rating system going forward, even after operations.
Well, I mean, it was meant from the very beginning to be something that was simple, and again, for sure, if you make it more complicated, you can capture a lot more information. But at the same time, adding complication makes comparison more difficult, and then there is a million excuses to be able to say, well, you can compare this company to this other, and so that's why we went with this way. And then the last thing is really this all index, the scoring works logarithmically at the end, meaning the closer you get to the end, the slower the progress, because basically asymptotically 10 would be
Yep.
a company that is certified, entered service and producing thousands of airplanes a year, and that is a very long road. And so what you see right now, it's that companies are kind of like started to gather up at certain point, but moving
Yes.
from here on, it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that I've always wondered and questioned a lot of these companies who were well funded. Now, obviously, we know who I'm talking about here, but did you really vet those investors really well in the beginning? Did you tell them how long it is? In aerospace and aviation specifically, we have a saying, a decade, $1 billion, and 1,000 engineers, and that's just one airplane, right? So of course, I never had a really great answer to that one, but you kind of saw it in the beginning. There were billions of dollars. Now they're like, hey, we finally got $100 million. Hey, we got $500,000. It's probably not the best message to send out to the industry. But needless to say, I think also just to give Caesar his due here is that every disruptive technology, every disruptive industry goes through the same thing. There's a really big hype moment, early investors who may or may not know or may not be very savvy when it comes to that technology. And of course, demand returns on profits a little too early. That's part of the game. It always happens this way. So now we're going through a bit of a lull, and I guess some have also called it the winter of investment, but it's coming back again. It looks like we get a lot of interest. So what's your take on all of that on the economic part of things?
Well, so let's start with the this delay, these delays and this perceived lack of progress. So I think
Good
this
point.
was all fabricated by unrealistic expectation to start with.
Absolutely.
So, because really there is not a natural process like childbirth where you know how long it needs to take and you can just go in half the time. But
Yep.
really, it is similar. It's just our childbirth or airplane birth. It's 9 to 12 years on an average
Yes.
aerospace program. If
Yes.
you turn back the clock of time and you say, let's say a company was funded in 2019, 2020, certified in 27, 28. I mean, that's a great program. It's a good accomplishment. But if you said that you would do it in 3 years, now it looks late. But that expectation was never there to begin. And I think it was mediated also by the fact that some of these companies come from tech, and
Uh,
they mistook the fact that some of those tech tools could be applied to aerospace, like betas and stuff like that, and not beta technologies, but beta as opposed to an alpha. The
yes.
unfortunate thing with aerospace is a very binary industry. That means you're certified or you're not certified. So this is not like, some software or some games where you get it the first time, you don't like it, but a year later it's great. Aerospace doesn't work like that. You're not
Nope.
going to be certified until you are great. And so it's a different story when it comes to the things we're working on. I mean, every industry, we call it the problem of the mountains. Every time you're climbing a mountain in a mountain range, you always think you're on the tallest mountain, only to crest a mountain and see that there is actually way taller mountains behind it, but you only see one at a time. And so right now, the whole industry is looking at certification for very good reasons, but
Yep.
we're starting already to sniff the fact that entry into service, it's the next problem. And then the next problem is going to be, can I make enough airplanes to make money? And then the last problem, that should be the overarching most fundamental of them all, is, can I make enough money? Because those three steps don't count for nothing if you are not a viable company that can survive on its own. Now, when it comes to funding, you were mentioning, it's really not a winter. It's more of a, I would say, if you take the climate for investment in advanced air mobility, it kind of looks like the United States. If you're in Southern California or in Florida, it's beautiful, it's sunny, it's gorgeous. You go to other part and it's snowing and it's bad. And so what do I mean with that? What I mean with that is the sun always goes to the same places. And here the money is always going to the same companies. Last year, I think this year, we actually raised more money than last year. The thing is, almost 70 to
Yeah.
80% of the money went to three or four companies or five companies, and that's it.
Bingo. Bingo.
And the truth is also, I mean, it's an escalation of commitment. It's usually what we do in investment and in everything. As human being, we look forward, we don't look backwards. That's why they call them sunk costs, because you're like, ah, it happened, you can go back, but you see this progress going forward. And then the second thing is, a lot of these companies that are coming later really do not have a differentiated product compared to the first wave of company. So if
Indeed.
you're doing the same thing a Joby is doing, or an Archer, and they have almost 3 billion or more than $3 billion raised and almost $2 billion in their pockets, yet still to spend, I mean, how you gonna beat them? Um, Now, how you gonna beat them? You're gonna beat them by coming from another country like China, but that's a different story.
That's a
Or if
different
you're in the
story.
West, then, well, it's a little bit complicated.
Yeah, if you're in the West, it's a little bit complicated, and you've raised so many great points in here, and I want to get back to the Silicon Valley mentality, which of course kind of skews the way they look at it, and also another very obvious one is that, have you noticed, and talking to the audience here, how the vehicle makers are mostly here in the United States and infrastructure is mostly in Europe, which promises a lot of interesting years up ahead. But I want to get back to this, and this is a point, by the way, we make very often here, is there really are different types of advanced air mobility companies, and we definitely see those with very Silicon Valley roots, very exuberant, very will revolutionize the world of aviation. And all of a sudden, the world of aviation turns out is very conservative, very pragmatic. We don't move very quickly. And there are reasons for that because you know what? My butte goes up in the air and it needs to be safe until it lands. So obviously not saying that these guys are not, don't have safety in mind, but there is a clash. And I've noticed, by the way, that same clash I've noticed in the CNC machining world too, where you have the mom and pop shops that make the little pieces for everything, spacecraft, everything. And they're retiring because they also have AI coming in from the up there saying, we can do it with AI. And there's a clash in between there. It's just not gelling somewhere along the line. So it's a very strange dynamics that we're seeing in this industry. I don't know if you've also witnessing the same thing too, I guess.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different pieces. I mean, if you look at how many Silicon Valley companies, there's really not many, but it happens to be some of the big ones that are from Silicon Valley. And also, Silicon Valley is very different. Some people in Silicon Valley are visionaries,
Yeah.
some people are more pragmatic.
Yes. Yes.
But again, I mean, the underlying things is there is this understanding that they're the smartest people in the world. But I would say also it's true, but the world is also full of smart people. So I don't think that there is a monopoly of a location in the world where the smart people are.
No, no, indeed. And another great thing that we've noticed over the years, and this is something we certainly didn't have in the good old days of Uber Elevate, is now we have a plethora of various aircrafts where the operational envelopes are the wingless eVTOLs. I'm thinking of SkyDrive and everything, great for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And then we have, of course, Joby, Archer, all these guys. And then we have eSTOLs, and then we have eCTOLs. And I've noticed a lot of the operation kind of really goes into the others. They're encroaching on one another. Like an eSTOL can almost do some things that eVTOLs can do, and so on and so forth. So going back to your question of, what is the differentiating factor with these new companies? I wonder if they need to start looking more in that direction, or maybe pigeonhole themselves inside of an operational envelope. That's going to be interesting to see the next few years, especially for the new companies coming on board now.
Well, I mean, number one, the definition of AAM, it's very fuzzy, to be kind. So it's my funny definition of AAM. It's if it doesn't fly today, that's AAM, but that doesn't mean much. And the other
No.
part, it's AAM, it's many different missions. But we
Yes.
have fallen in love with this air taxi mission, and it's not going to be the one that grows up that grows quickly, the quickest. There's cargo, there's EMS, there's a lot of others, and we need to deal with the fact that again these vehicles were always meant for some specific mission with specific
Yep.
limitation, and so
Yep.
when we want them to do missions that are outside of those boundaries, that's why now we're talking about hybrid, et cetera. And then I mean it was interesting because with Agility Prime, it was always born to be something that we look for the help of military, but now we're all surprised that we see a lot of company pivoting in that direction when if you look at the history of many of the companies that have been created in the last 30-40 years, the US government plays a very significant role in
Yes.
getting them past these first
Yes.
few years.
Yes.
And again, I mean, it's a good thing because I mean, the government has virtually unlimited money because they can keep borrowing or overtaxing, but it's either or and. And so I think it's a good thing this pivot, but again, it requires something that is slightly different from what they were developing before. And the last thing that I would say is I find it always amusing when people are worried about failures of companies when the same folks years ago, and I'm not referring to someone, I'm just saying in general, they were the one that said we have too many entrants, they should fail. Well, now they're failing. You should be happy that the
Not me.
industry
Not me.
is evolving instead of being worried that the industry is going nowhere, because we always knew from the very beginning. I mean, how many aerospace company in the world make airliners? How many aerospace company in the world make fighters, make helicopters? I mean, they almost all fit on the palm of one hand, and you can have a long tail of whatever you want. And so, why should it be any difference in this industry?
Yeah, and that's a very good point you make, is that every disruptive technologies, which basically is everything that we have around us at one point or another, was a disruptive technology. Jumping on a horse was a disruptive technology. Yeah, and there were tons of different systems and tons of different iterations. When I started working with the Vertical Flight Society, if you go to eVTOL.com/aircraft, you can see all the projects that there are there. It's not just companies, it's projects, but there were 35 projects way back in
Mhm.
2015. And then it grew to 100, which was a celebration. By the way, I brought in two. I was really excited about that. And today you've got about 500 or so different projects and everything. But we always knew we're going to have eventually 3 to maybe 5 companies, but eventually you only have 3 companies. Pretty much the way we have Boeing and Airbus sharing what 95% of the bigger jets out there and leaving everybody else behind, which is great, which is the way things work. One thing you did mention that I wanted to highlight is I always questioned the idea of calling it advanced air mobility, because, like you said, once it's there, it's no longer advanced, right? And I like the Europeans' way of saying innovative air mobility. It gives it a little bit more of a stretch. So I kind of wish we would slip over to that one. And if you go to NASA's original definition of advanced air mobility, which is very, very much like you said, it's a huge umbrella and it has lots of little segments within. Well, it also talks about hypersonic hydrogen flight, which obviously we're not doing. So yeah, it's a very strange term to use and it could be a little confusing. And I guess I understand why they came up with two other terms I equally don't like, is flying cars and air taxis, because, well, they're not flying cars and they're not taxis either. Maybe limousines would have been a better way to say. I don't know. But anyway, that certainly got people maybe a little too excited at first. And when you go on Reddit, you have a lot of people who are very excited about things, and I'm just going, okay, we'll see.
But Reddit, it's an interesting place
I
to
like
go.
it.
But
Yeah, I like
once
Reddit.
in a while, there's gems there.
Yes, there are, and there's some really good people in there. Like sometimes you just have a questions, and you'll find some really good people. Another point you brought up, and that's a very near and dear point to something we've been doing ever since the beginning of this year with this podcast is, there's certifications, and then there's certifications, right? And then one thing that we've been hearing a lot in this industry is, well, we'll be certified this year, we'll be certified next year. And one thing we all agree on is, we're not going to be operational for another 5 years. So there's a little bit of a disconnect here, right? And I just wanted to get your take on that because, yeah, prototype certification, that's achievable. Operational certification, that's billions of dollars. And like you said, right now, there are only two, three companies who can actually even think about doing that, and probably governments. So, but what's your take on that? I'm glad you brought it up because I wanted to ask your point of view on the certification race, or is it hype?
No, I mean, no. I mean, to tell you the truth, we can always say that we expect entry into service of an aircraft in a certain date, and that is what the Airbus, the Boeings have always communicated. They never talked about certification because it
Oh,
would be putting words in someone else's mouth.
yep.
An AAM OEM doesn't certify the aircraft. They receive a certification from the regulator. Therefore, it's the regulator that dictates the timing based on how good of a job the OEM has done in A, educating the regulator, and B, is working with the regulator through all of the tests that they need to do. And so when it comes to this, that's why I think lately no one is talking about certification in the US anymore. I mean, they're still
Yep,
talking
that's
about
true.
or entry into service in the US. The only thing that they say, some of them, is this 2028 Olympic that has become the new goal line. And again, I mean, you know better than me. 2028 in aerospace, it's, and I know it sounds like a trite joke, but it's tomorrow because
It's
we
tomorrow.
take a long time to do anything. And but if we look at these, I mean, we are in the US dealing with a very conservative FAA. I
Yes.
mean, we can see it in the 777X certification,
Yes.
where even the CEO of Boeing came out and say, the FAA is taking a long time. And CEO of Boeing, it's never known for criticizing
Nope.
or lightly criticizing the FAA, but the FAA is going slow. And but again, I mean, the FAA works for us, the public. They don't work for the
Right.
OEM. And so the
Right.
FAA goal is to make sure that going on one of these airplanes is a non-event,
Yes.
like going downstairs in your house or walking to get a drink of water. And it will take the time that it needs to take. But at the same time, I mean, we need to understand that at the very beginning, we were saying, the regulations are not there. No, the regulations are there. The airplanes are not there. Once the airplanes are there, this will start. But again, I mean, 12 to 24 months certification, 18 to 24 months is normal. 12, it's a miracle because there is that many hours that they need to fly. And the other disadvantage possibly of this airplane is that all the flying needs to be done 15 to 30 minutes at a time. If you are
Yes.
certifying, a business jet, you can go fly for 6 hours. And that's a lot of flight time and data that you've gathered. Here, this thing, it's a little bit like any of our cordless devices. You can only do that much before you got to plug it back in. And
That's well
so
said.
it's very mean to compare an eVTOL to a Hoover or a hair dryer, but
Oh
they
yeah.
are all the same when it comes to a battery and plug it into the wall. What we see is, I mean, you have to consider two things. Number one, it's the certification timeline. These
Yeah.
EIPP coming in an executive order from the White House and the Department of Transportation. It's not going to do much for certification. What he's going to do is build more confidence in operations when it comes to entry into service. And so this might help reduce that entry into service timeline that could stretch up to a year from certification to hopefully something that's shorter, maybe even down to 3 months, 6 months, something very short. But the truth is, when you certify a normal airplane, it doesn't matter what airport you're doing your tests. That airport, by definition, looks the same as any other airport in the world. Maybe the runway is longer, there's more runway, there's more passengers, but it's the same thing. There's a runway with certain marking, taxiway, etc., etc. When these airplanes are going to do their test, it's highly unlikely that they will be able or be allowed to fly over a city of
Ah,
millions of
yes.
people before they're
Yep.
certified. So the
Yep.
issue here is that even after certification, these airplanes have never operated in the relevant environment in which they have to operate. So it takes time. And hopefully this EIPP will allow to maybe shorten a little bit that time so that these guys can enter service quicker. I mean, this year, it's the time that we're cooking the pasta, and next year more cooking, and hopefully end of next year, beginning of 27 or sometime in 27, there's going to be an airplane. But I wouldn't be surprised if this timeline go to 27 or 28.
Oh,
Now, the
absolutely.
question that many would have is, what about UAE? And what we think is
Ah,
UAE is going to is going to avail themselves of the certification in the US. But then what they can do is they can shorten that entry into service as much as they want, because that is something that they can control more directly.
yeah, and it's a completely different airspace. It's run completely differently. I think my conversations with them over there was very interesting, and they said it boils down to two things: is the FAA and EASA. We're seeing what they're doing, and although they might lean more towards EASA, the FAA doesn't really matter. But they said somewhere in the middle, here we are. Our given world, 500 feet. Anything else is military. So we've got a very an easy problem to solve. The only thing I really wonder if they can solve is how the heck do you make an aircraft hover when it's 140 Fahrenheit and it's air cooled? Now that's a one that no one has been able to answer. But you know what? We'll let them figure it out, especially on their next generations. Another thing too that I think you made a really good point. I think for a little while, people were blaming the FAA for being too slow, and EASA and everything. I mean, seriously, think about it. These guys in the 60s, they would hang off of the wing of an airplane and say, all right, that's good. You can go fly with it. Well, today, what people don't realize is how many hours and how many months and years that a lot of companies, specifically OEMs, but also a lot of us have gone and worked with the FAA and told them about, well, this is a controller, this is a battery management system, this is a battery. No, batteries don't explode out of nowhere. In fact, there are a lot of cases where they don't do it, so on and so forth. So I think we should give them a little bit of a congratulations. But you said it really well. The FAA works for us. The ESA works for the Europeans, and that's well for the entire world actually. So that's a good point to be made. Tell me little bit about you made a really great point. The last talk we had was, by the way, on our master class that we had in Rome not too long ago, and that was the economic impact and also the neighboring impact. And this is something that I think you and Curtis, by the way, did a wonderful job at that presentation, that master class. And this is something we just haven't had a lot of data yet. And you guys have managed to pull up some really interesting numbers, which also, by the way, explains why we don't have operators yet, because it's kind of, you have to wait for one to come to the other until you have the companies that will operate there. Can you tell us a little bit about the economics and where do you see it maybe happening first? Like you said, flying over a city might not be the best place where we want to start flying, at least until it's fully certified. So tell me a little bit about your take on all the economics of this
Well,
industry.
so let's the economics vary significantly by use case, right? So maybe let's talk about which use cases might be the stickiest ones. And the stickiest use case for sure is going to be cargo. And the reason is we divide use cases between push demand and pull demand. In a pull demand, you have customers looking for a product that does not exist, but they want it. It's not
Hmm.
there. And we think that that is cargo, because the
Yep.
truth is this e-commerce is great. The last mile, let's leave the conversation for another day, another year, another decade. It's a lot more complicated.
Yes.
And we
Yes.
can deliver packages very efficiently today inside our cities. However, it's the warehouses that's starting to be the problem, because these warehouses are expanding, expanding, expanding at the same time where the value of the land becomes more and more expensive. And so these warehouses are pushing farther and farther out from population center, and that makes the need for smaller warehouses closer to the population center, but those small
That's a good
warehouses
point.
don't carry the same inventory. And so, how do we get this inventory from the big warehouses to the smaller warehouses? We created a term that's called middle mile, and that is where the middle mile today is served on the road. And how do you do that? Well, you can put some airplanes inside, and the US has a significantly large feeder network that could use some
Yeah.
greening up.
Yeah. Yep.
because it's always difficult to compete with a fully depreciated caravan
Yep.
because it's $0. And so this is when we comes to cargo. This is what we think. And I mean, if we look at our forecast, we have our own market forecast. In the next few months, we are going to share it with the world. And what we can say is that by the end of the decade, probably cargo is going to be the majority of the airplanes. And to bring some proof points to this statement, the only two AAM aircraft that are flying right now are
Yes.
two
Good.
Beta CX, one in
Absolutely.
New Zealand and one in Norway, and
Yep.
that's it.
Absolutely.
And the beauty of this is that both airplanes are leased by an operator from Beta, and the people that are flying are operator people, not Beta people. Everyone else, it's different. Now, with Joby, it's a muddled water because they're the operator, they're the OEM, so it's a little bit different. When it comes to other use cases, EMS could be a use case with
Yes.
the caveat that number one, not many of these airplanes have actually the space, but that is not the problem. Is almost none of this vehicle has the payload or the hover time to serve these missions. Now, EMS is actually five different missions, not just one, that goes from
Right.
transporting blood, that's the simplest, but then you don't need any VTOL, you can use a drone, all the way to picking up critical patients from the location of an accident, that is the most difficult.
That's
And
very
so
difficult.
you have the entire gamut there. On the other side, there is what we call this push demand market, where the demand does not exist, but a product comes along and
Exactly. Well, we've
it
seen that
stimulates,
before.
right, and stimulates this demand. So none of us has gone to our politicians and said, "Hey, I want to fly to the airport." It's a great idea, but it will take time to take root.
Oh,
And
oof.
I think the OEMs, I think in a certain sense, Uber Elevate was good because it
Yep.
painted a vision. The problem is it was never communicated like that. And so it was communicated as the state, not as the end state. And so a lot of people saw this, oh, this is happening tomorrow. No, Uber Elevate was a vision of these 2040s. It's not tomorrow. I mean, today it's it's a little bit like the first cars. They weren't super cool. They're like body with four wheels slapped to the side, and that's it. Before you enter unibody, aerodynamics, and all this other good stuff. And so the same is going to happen to this industry, but at the very beginning, aspirational, magical, or an expectation that these things are going to be less costly to operate than owning your own car. Well, I mean, even now the cars average about 45 to 50,000. It's still very cheap to operate a car,
Compared
um,
to before.
especially
Absolutely.
if you put electricity in. um,
No,
and
God, even less. Yeah.
right, and so when you look at that, but again, they were talking about $2 to $3 a mile. Really, more and more OEMs are kind of like between their teeth saying $8 a mile. So we're moving to $8 to $9 a mile, $10 a mile. It sounds like a lot of money. A movement like a downtown LA, like a JFK to
Oh,
downtown Manhattan, you're talking, maybe you're talking like 120, 150, 200, $300. It doesn't matter. Um, the numbers are less than a helicopter for sure. Uh,
absolutely.
they're they're the same as an Uber Black per passenger. By the way, the Uber Black doesn't charge you per seat; they charge you for the whole car.
For the whole car. Yeah, that's not a great comparison.
Also, if you got your family, it's one thing, it's $200 and you get to the airport. Another thing, it's $200 multiplied by four to get to the airport. But at the same time, what I find and interesting is instead of comparing it, this is the time where we need to look at tech. So instead of comparing this to the helicopters and say, see, helicopter never scaled, let's compare these to big screen TV. When you walk into a Best
Yeah.
Buy and you see a $25,000 television, first thing you say, these people are crazy. And by the way, I like those screens, and there is $99,000 televisions, and you look at those and your first thought, not this is crazy, your first thought is, wow, this is awesome, let's have more rich people buy them so I can buy my bigger TV. My bigger TV is going to get cheaper. And so why not look at this the same way? Instead of looking at, oh, these are wealthy people that can afford to fly because we're looking at first class, why don't we look at these as more wealthy people fly it so that the cost of operating these airplanes comes down because we have more and more, so that now I can afford to fly on one of these aircraft. And I think this is the way that we should be looking at this industry. And in the long term,
Yep.
air taxi, this urban air mobility is going to be the lion's share by a lot, 75, 70% of the entire advanced air mobility. But at the same time, it's not going to be tomorrow. It's not going to be the day after tomorrow. It's probably going to be in the second half of the next decade when this is
Absolutely.
going to happen.
Absolutely. I think regional air mobility might also have an earlier start because it makes more sense to use airplanes and to hybridize them or something like that. But yeah, no,
See,
that's
the regional air mobility, to me, it's an interesting conversation. And one of the things that I find flawed when it comes to the approach of the regional air mobility proponents many times is the problem that I call the problem of the pool. Everyone has a pool, so everyone needs, I don't know, a floating ducky. But what if no one wants a floating ducky just because they have a
mhm.
pool? So just because we have 5,000 airport doesn't mean that this 5,000 airport needs or want service. Number two, especially in the United States, we like to drive up to 5 to 6 hours because
Yep.
the truth is when I go to another city, most cities in the US want a public transportation. I have to rent a car
That's
and
true.
back to square one. And last but not least, we need to make the calculation that these vehicles will very probably expand their service at the same time where level 3 and level
True.
4 automation comes in. So GM yesterday or 2 days ago in their tech day, they showed that by 2028 they're going to sell a Cadillac IQ with level 3 driving. That means on
Right.
the freeway you can actually be eyes off, means you can actually read a book for real. And so when it comes to these, am I going to take an airplane or just get a car and sleep in it? I know it's farther out, but there is a market out there for sure for this kind of
There
mobility. How big
yeah.
is it? It's a different story in which I don't think I agree with some of the folks out there.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's not going to be a panacea, but at the same time, I mean, I'll give you a very simple example. If you want to look at Georgia, you can see where Savannah is, and Augusta. Those are really great examples. Now, to go to Atlanta, it used to take me 3.5 hours, maybe 4 hours. Now it takes me 6 hours. So I really hate it. Hate it, hate it, hate it. But to go to Augusta, which is even closer, it takes me 2.5 hours because there are no highways. So it's back roads and everything. Now, flying virtually from airport to airport is 35 minutes. Augusta, even less. It's probably 20 minutes. I could even get a Cessna 172, done deal. I could get there, 40 minutes, take my time and all that good stuff and everything. So I think in those cases, it would make sense because we're reopening up old routes that used to be there, don't exist anymore. We used to have a rail system between Atlanta and Savannah. They're talking about it. But instead of just opening up a regular L with a, pendolino train, they want to do a high speed train. I was like, don't do that. That's too
Yeah.
expensive. Why would you want to do that? It's ridiculous. So yeah, I think you're right. In some cases it will make sense. But you're right. When we talk about Boston to New York to Washington, DC, well, you already have the Acela. I mean, do you really want to do that? Is that really worth it? So I think for some cases, you're right. We take a car, it works. For some other cases, the Los Angeles to San Diego, Los Angeles to Oceanside. I mean, all these other places might be well worth it. I think that, you've got Fullerton is a great little airport not too far away from you. That's an underused airport that has all the space in the world to make hydrogen, to make anything you want. So I don't know. I see it for some things. Yeah, for other things, I don't really understand it. Now, places like Vancouver, Washington State, Portland, all these places where you have islands you want to
Oh,
connect,
yes.
that makes way more sense. But yeah, and again, I think there's the right tool for the right circumstance and the right operation. So I think we're discovering this a lot more. The problem is, how do we tell people about that? There's for this you want to do that, for that you want to do that, and yes, it's the convergence of mobility that we're looking at, that we've been talking about for so long now, and it's happening in one way or another.
I mean, it's a little bit like, if you talk to any of the Chinese OEMs, not a lot of them will talk about regional. Maybe it's because they have the largest high speed network of trains in the world.
Yes.
And you can beat them on speed. I mean, you can beat them on speed, but not much, because some of these trains fly as, I mean, go down the rails as fast as these airplanes. And the second thing is, if you put 1,600 people and use electricity, yes, you are going to use 1/100 of the electricity,
Yes.
but you happen to have 40 times more people.
Yes.
So it doesn't work. I mean, for the electricity that you need to move one person in a eVTOL, you can move 40 in a high-speed train. That's a different story.
Yes. Yeah, I think the only thing that we can rely on is, the fact that battery energy density, power density has always shrunk and it gets more affordable. That's the only thing that I can hope for, unless you have some sort of hybrid system that works really well. Or I'm a big Star Trek fan. We can warp bubbles around space continuum, but that's not just for now. Or maybe it already exists and we just don't know about it. Who knows, kind of thing. So definitely. So we're coming up on 40 minutes of this, and by the way, you have an open invitation to come back whenever you want, because I love our conversations. I love meeting you somewhere around the world and having fun. That's always been the case, but also you're one of the rare professionals out there where we can have fun and we can be serious too at the same time. So I don't want to honor that. But what we usually move into at this point is the more personal stuff. Is are you crazy? What are you doing in this industry? This is a crazy industry. So, Sergio, what is your motivation for what gets you out of bed in the morning?
Well, I mean, you know that most of adults' problems generated when we were kids, right? So
That's so true.
it's the same thing here. So I grew up in a world of stealth aircraft, B-2, F-117. I still remember the first picture that the US government releases, extremely squished. It didn't look like
Yeah.
the F-17. I think it's probably the same that is happening to the F. They just picked an
Hmm.
angle or something to confuse
Yeah.
us or confuse someone else rather than us. But all of this diversity and everything, it was got me into aerospace. Then to go through the intervening 20 years of stretching 737 and A320, that is not the most fun thing in the world. And when I saw this explosion in this industry, where whoever says we're converging towards a single configuration, I think they still haven't picked and looked at all of the different configurations that are out there. But at the same time, I mean, it reignited that youthful spirit to say, "Wow, this is interesting." And to tell you the truth, thank God, because we have an age problem in aerospace.
Yeah.
I mean, I was always the youngest at 20. I was always the youngest at 30, and that's fine. Always the youngest at 40, not that fine. And thank God I'm not the youngest anymore, because it would be bad. And we've seen a lot of young folks wanted to come into aerospace.
True.
These were the same folks that 10 years ago, they wanted to go work for Google, they wanted to go work for Apple, and they still
That's
want to go
true.
work for them, but they're
Yeah.
coming back into aerospace to say,
Yeah.
this thing is interesting. And they're not doing it because they are going to do a new airliner, because the truth is, if you walk in mid development of an airliner, you might see one new airliner in your life, or
Yes.
two, three if you're super lucky. But in this industry, who knows, you might see like 10 different variation throughout
Oh,
different
yes.
industries. And I think that that is very important, because number one, at certain point after 30, 40 years of working, people get bored and they want to do something else. And number
Of course.
two, the longer you do the same thing, the longer you get used to see things done that way. And so it's good when people come from outside and say, hey, I would do it this way. 9 out of 10, it's not good, but the 1 out of 10, it's what can
It is
change
good.
an industry and the world.
Yeah. There are not too many Steve Jobs around, but when they happen, they're really interesting what they do to industries.
100%.
Yeah, that's true. Tell us, what would you like people to walk away from what we've talked today? And you're welcome to come back whenever you want. But
Thank you.
specifically today, what would be the one thing you would want people to walk away from?
Well, I would want people to walk away with the understanding that these industries are here to stay, and it's not slowing down. It's just going at the pace that we all expected in aerospace. And this
Yes.
is an aerospace business where you can pull over when something goes wrong, and you can let your battery burn if something happens in flight because you got out of the car. Because jumping out of airplanes is something that it's better done with a parachute if you do it for a hobby.
Hmm. I would say that's a very wise ending statement to this podcast. Sergio, thank you very much for taking the time out to be with us. I look forward to seeing you again. We've already announced it. We will have another great class in AAM, and that will be in Vancouver. That'll be next year, so I look forward to that. But I can also break the news that we will have one even sooner than that, and I'm still waiting for the confirmation of that, but you're always very welcome to be with
Thank you.
us. So I thank you again for being here. And then for everyone, please share, like, subscribe, tell us what you think. Has your idea of advanced air mobility changed? You certainly picked up some wonderful golden nuggets right here. Let us know what you like, what you understand, and what would you like to see in the future. And also, just simply, what does AAM mean to you? Has your definition changed? Do you see it differently? We certainly hope so. And in the meantime, we again say thank you to Sergio. Goodbye,
Thank you.
Sergio. And then we'll see you soon again. And well, we'll see you guys next week again. Thank you.